Yeah, so the CSAE Board Ready Card Deck is an experiment for CSAE focused on boards of directors and getting them more engaged and providing them with tools to support them in their governance work. So the card deck set up, there's 78 cards in total, and it's organized under 2 different streams. So there's 4 perspectives, so things like productive hindsight, purposeful foresight, ambient oversight, and actionable insight. So that's one way to look at the deck, but under each of those perspectives are also the modes of the board work. So whether the board's learning about something, are they thinking about it and discerning it more closely, are they having discussion, or are they acting on it? So for us, as Guy said, we've been an early adopter. We got our card decks at OWL in April, and 2 weeks later we were having board orientation. And our board president was on board. We actually participated in the crowdfunding campaign. And so she was really excited to get these decks. So we sat down and we looked at how could we use this new tool in our board orientation process. And so in that particular one, we used a lot of the cards under oversight. So things like understanding fiduciary responsibilities and understanding legal duties. So we included some of those cards as a different way to talk about those issues at the board table and with new directors who perhaps didn't have as much experience in governance. Sorry, that's my microphone. From there, we continued on and we used it at every single board meeting. And so at each board meeting, we set up a time at the beginning of the agenda called Setting the Stage. And so in those instances, we look at what's on our agenda later on and which cards can help us have some of that more deep discussion. So for example, when we were looking at expansion and bringing forward an expansion plan, which is, for those of you in our risk management session this morning, that was pretty high risk for our organization, something that we've never really looked at before. We looked at cards like understanding scenario learning and understanding risks and business model risks. And we created a sequence. So in that case, we looked at a sequence that allowed us to talk about all 4 perspectives. So hindsight, oversight, insight, and foresight. And in that case, we went through each of the sessions, each of those cards, and sometimes we use small groups. So we'll break into small groups and have discussion on the same sequence and then come back for large group reports. Other times we just have a large group discussion. So there's many different ways that you can use the card deck. We've also used it for strategic planning. So we introduced the card deck to our strategic planning facilitator, who's now introducing it to lots of other people, by the way, so that's great. And she helped us create sequences that we could use with the cards that allowed us to talk about orthodox beliefs and to talk about honoring the past, but also talk about accelerating pace for the future. So we were able to combine that. And what we found at our board is that the directors not only come prepared with their card decks now and their smartphones or device to look at the digital content, but they're now emailing me before the board meeting and saying, hey, I saw the agenda and I was looking at that card deck and I think we should talk about this card. So it does take a little bit of time to build momentum within the board, but once they're used to using it, I found that they now use it as their own tool. And what the board chair and I have talked about is we can make more informed decisions, and we can make those decisions on average about 40% quicker than we could in the past, because when they get to that really hard discussion, they remember back to the conversation we had earlier in the meeting.
Sounds great. Any questions from the panel?
Yeah, Lori, I was actually representing Ottawa-Gatineau here, just wondering when it's going to be available in French.
Excellent. We've had a lot of questions about that. We are making some progress. I know that Michael's met with 2 French-based firms who are looking at not only how we can transition the deck to French, but also the website and the digital content as well. So it is coming, though I don't think we have a specific time frame yet, but it's in the works.
Steve?
Lori, I've got a question. I'm wondering if there will be training or support available to board chairs or chief staff people who just are unsure about how to use the card deck. Will there be any of that kind of training available?
Yeah, so the team at CSAE has been working on lots of different support tools. So there's a primer available for the chief staff officer or the executive director that tells them how to introduce it to their boards, because we know that that's kind of the gatekeeper to get into the boards. And then there's a second primer that they receive that they can give to the board directors themselves, which talks about how the directors, helping them understand how they can use the deck. So those 2 tools are available. You can get them at the CSAE, it's at the registration desk or the bookstore.
Great.
And as well, the staff are really great. They're around this week and they're talking to folks about the card deck and talking through how they can use it and making sure that people are comfortable with what they're doing. So those are a couple of tools that are available already.
Great. I think what I'd add to Steve's question, what we've done is for the people who purchased the deck and what we call phase 2, which started on July 2nd, is reach out to those individuals. Because like any new tool, as you know, what you've got to be able to do is to get people up to speed, because as you can see with this great resource, It's incredible in terms of what it helps the board do, but it's getting people started. So I've reached out to a number of people. I want to have conversations with them about how they want to position it with their board. I think as Lori noted, there's 78 cards in the deck. We're not looking for people to use them all at the same time, but we know there's a starting point where people have got to begin, start talking about things like, as Lori said earlier, understanding risk, boards understanding what their fiduciary duty is. So I think it's one step at a time for us. So there's very much going to be a lot of in-person contact with individuals who are considering the deck or bought it and are looking to use it. And then also, talking to their board members about how they're seeing the experience.
Anything else you can share with us, Lori, in terms of next steps? I know that at the board, we've been using it at the CSAE board. And then when we worked with Jeff, we had talked about the concept of recipes. And can you talk about that?
Yeah, Jeff and I were talking about that this morning, actually. So I think one of the key tools that we want to work on next is creating this recipe book almost, where we look at if you're looking at particular, let's say growth, you're looking at growth. Here's a couple of different sequences of cards that you could use to help support that discussion with the board. So I think those kind of really tangible tools will help chief staff officers and their board chairs sort of move forward. The key thing really is to get it out of the box, start to look at it, and as Michael said, pick one card to start with. For me, as soon as we took it out of the box, I got rid of the box. So I have a big elastic band. I got some tabs to separate out the different perspectives to make it easier to find things.
Excellent. And we keep referring to boards, but I think it's also quite useful with your own teams, right, internally. So that's one way to get started. If for any reason you have some issues of starting with the board, but using it with your own teams is a great way to get started. Excellent.
Absolutely.